I love you, but be so for real. Not all guardianships, not all conservatorships are bad. I know we have so many high profile cases, the biggest one being Britney Spears, but they're not all meant to control people and their money. There's so many of them that are doing more good than they are harm, and I've brought a professional who helps families with these to tell us how they really work and how they can bring benefit to people who are struggling in our society. Before we get into it, like, subscribe, follow to the podcast at I Love You But Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, we're there. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us today.
Well, India, wonderful to see you again. How you doing?
Yes, I know we had a good chat last
We
week,
did.
and I've been so excited for getting to talk to you today because just like the little questions that I asked before just to get an idea sparked so many other questions in my head as you were responding. So I'm really excited to kind of break the stigma against one, addiction, and the legal options that there are for families to help members that may be suffering. So my first question for you, to paint a picture for the audience of what does it look like when a family comes to you for help? Like, what kind of situation are they in? Like, what have they gone through before to when they land at your step and are like, we need your help?
Yeah. So the mission of the firm India is to save families whose loved ones are suffering from substance use, mental health disorders, and failed attempts at recovery. So we are speaking to families from all over the country. Even though we're based in Florida, we're taking calls from, as far west as Hawaii, certainly up in the Northeast corridor, that New York, New England area. And it's usually parents calling us because they have an adult child with a long history of drug use, mental illness, treatment that doesn't work if they'll even go. They're probably med non-compliant, and they may well have been a guest of the state through either the criminal justice system or the mental health system, and they may even have had an overdose. And the family calls us and says, can you fix this problem? And the answer to that is yes, but recovery takes time. It's typically a year-long journey, and recovery is a journey. It's not a destination. In other words, you don't just go to treatment for X amount of months or whatever it is, and then you're done. You never have to worry about it again. It doesn't work that way. I mean, people that are in recovery work on a daily basis to be able to maintain recovery. Otherwise, they tend to relapse. So that's who we are speaking to when they call us.
So it's normally not the actual person who's an addict. It's normally or like having some sort of mental health crisis. It's normally their family member or someone close to them.
Yes, so we are not. We very rarely represent the patient because the patient has a disease of the mind, and it's as if their brain was hijacked. They're not capable of making the decision to save themselves. If they were, right, they would have done it already by the time they get to us. So we're dealing with a situation where someone is typically in complete and utter denial about their need for help. And usually they tell they're telling their parents, you need to go, it's you that needs to go into treatment, not me. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with denial. And sometimes there's denial in the family too about what needs to happen here.
So that leads me to another question I have, because there's a fine line between like helping an addict and enabling them. And I know with addiction and like mental health, it's hard to see like where that line starts and stops. So like what are some examples of when like someone's come to you for help, but really they were trying to enable and they weren't willing to do what was necessary to help the addict or mental health patient?
Well, when it comes to the decision makers, which is usually the mums and dads, not always. It could be husband trying to get wife into treatment, because they have children, and he wants to make sure that the mother is sober, so she can continue to be a good mother. It can also be, I've also had siblings file something against each other, or the adult children file against the parents, but it's usually mum and dad that's calling. Now, the tricky part, India, can be trying to get the parents, both mum and dad, on the same page, because what has been happening is mum, and I'm just using a hypothetical here, says, we should practice tough love. We should cut off all the money, all the funding, and kick him out of the house because we don't want this in our home anymore. And dad turns around and says, well, they'll end up on the streets. That doesn't help the situation, and we don't want them, basically disappearing. So I don't think that we should practice tough love. We need to make sure we continue to support them and encourage them to go to treatment, even though they've in the past never been willing to go, or if they have been willing to go, they never stay long enough. And my response to that is neither one of those serves the purpose, right? What works is when both parents are on the same page and both parents make the commitment to place their loved one into a clinically appropriate facility and keep them there long enough, and make sure they take their medications and do whatever else is required as part of the recovery process. Until that commitment is made, unfortunately the chaos, because that's what it is, it's chaos, continues, except it continues to get worse because this is a disease, and it will eventually destroy the family, because it'll destroy their loved one if they don't end up in a state mental health hospital or in prison or dead. And that's the reality of the situation. And I hate to be blunt, but we're dealing with life and death.
The reality of the situation. Like, those are the options. There's really no other option when it comes to that, when it comes to addiction and mental health, serious mental health issues. Now, using the word health and addiction and disease, we often think of like the medical piece of addiction and mental health crises. But when does it become something that families need this legal help with? Like, what makes it turn into also a legal issue?
You mean, when should they call me?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's a very fair question. So, I tell
we know the medical piece of like, okay, they need medical help for what, like, for the disease, but like, okay, why a lawyer?
Well, okay, so when you're dealing with somebody who has a brain disease, that's what it is, right? It's not like Parkinson's, that is an incurable disease for the most part. It's a behavioral health disease, which means it can be addressed and put into remission. We call it recovery, but it's really remission. When should they do that? I think when the family's tried all other options. And what I mean by that is they have confronted their loved one and said, there's a problem here and we need to address it. And if their loved one is like, there's nothing wrong with me, meanwhile their life is falling apart all around, right? They can't hold down a job, they can't stay in school, they can't maintain any kind of intimate relationship with anybody, they're not bathing, their eating habits have changed, they're hanging out with people they would never have even dreamed of hanging out with, they're sleeping all day, they're up all night. I mean, their life is just completely turned into the bizarro world. And at that point, if they are in denial about the situation, in other words, they're like, well, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm perfectly okay, this is normal, then I think we need to have a conversation about using legal intervention. And the whole point of using legal intervention is so that the family can become empowered to make the decision to save this person that this person cannot make on their own, right? If they could make that decision, that commitment, that even acknowledge that there's a problem, then you wouldn't need us. But we're at the point where that if we don't do something, then the consequences could be severe. Causes have effects, and effects have consequences, and the consequence of doing nothing is that somebody could end up dead, or in prison, or in a state mental hospital. I tell families the longer that you wait, the harder it becomes, because they become even more resistant. And obviously, clinically, because there's obviously a clinical component to this, the further down they are the proverbial rabbit hole, the harder it is to get them back out, the longer it takes to get them back out and on the road to recovery. I mean, it can be challenging. And if it's been going on for 5 years or 10 years, I mean, we meet some people where they may never live a normal life. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
They may never live a normal life, and maybe they need to live in some type of, supportive environment. It may be somebody who perhaps they've suffered some type of traumatic brain injury, because some of these substances can cause permanent brain damage. We're seeing so many new types of opioid. Obviously the legalized marijuana is a disaster. Now we're seeing things like kratom that can be bought at a gas station. Nitrous oxide. The kids are dusting now. I don't know if you know what that is. Basically, they're spraying an aerosol can and they're sniffing it as the stuff comes out. It's called dusting. And this stuff, these things can completely and utterly destroy your life, because they can fry your brain, literally fry your brain. So we see some very tragic things, India, and we also see families that, for whatever reason, just can't make the commitment. They just can't pull the trigger. And it's typically because the parents can't get on the same page. And then we call them 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, and we find out that somebody died. That's the nature of what we deal with. I know I'm one of the few lawyers in the country that knows that every year he may get one or more calls from a family, or we may speak to one or more families where somebody died. I mean, I had a guy recently, I'll give an example. Severe alcoholic. He was using, I don't know what else he was using, but he was only in his 40s, okay? And if you saw him and spoke to him, you'd think he was in his 70s. He walked like an older man. He sounded like an old man. And he had just damaged his brain beyond repair. And we actually put him into treatment a couple of times. He would not comply with the treatment protocol, and he eventually overdosed and died.
Wow. And just because he wouldn't comply with the treatment protocol.
He would not comply with the protocol. I also had a judge that wouldn't sanction him. I told the judge, I want you to put him in jail for a couple of weeks, because he's going to kill himself, and you need to punish him for violating your court order. And the judge wouldn't do it. And I went back 3 times to get the court order enforced, and the judge wouldn't do it. And then 6 months later, the guy was dead. So, I mean, this is what we deal with, right?
Yeah.
But this had been going on for so long. I mean, years and years and years. I mean, by the time the case got onto my desk, I mean, I was frankly surprised that he was even still alive. I mean, he was just a walking shell of himself. If you saw him, 10, 15 years before this happened, he was a, tall, athletic, good-looking guy. When I saw him, he looked like an old man, and he was only in his 40s.
Mm-hmm.
He just destroyed himself.
And so when you started talking about you tried to get court orders to get him sanctioned in some way, whether it be due jail time or whatever the case may be, when families are coming to you in this pretty much life or death situation, what legal options exist for them? I know you said in the state of Florida it may be a little different, but there's generally in the U.S. some recourse that looks the same.
Well, so there's 2 reasons to come to Florida. Like I said, most of the people that we work with are not here in Florida, but their loved ones, the patient, is either here, coming here, or I'm figuring out how to get them here. There's 2 reasons to come here to Florida. Number 1, we have really good treatment. A couple of years ago, we got a federal grant, and the local state attorney's office here used it to basically arrest all of the scumbags and insurance fraudsters and get them off the streets. And a lot of people went to jail. There were people. There was one particular individual who was, walking around in $2,000 Armanis, and he was pimping the girls out, pumping them full of drugs. I mean, he was just some piece of work. He ended up going to prison. And so did his wife, because she was just as bad. So we have really great treatment here. I mean, I only work with about 3, maybe 4 different facilities, where I would send my own family. So there's a select group that I'm comfortable with. Now, I can't speak for anybody else, but I know who I've vetted and who I've seen do the trick, right? Get somebody into recovery. So we have great treatment. The other reason to come here is that we have a legal system that really, especially here in South Florida, that is geared towards getting people into treatment. Now, one of the statutes that we operate under is called the Marchman Act. And it's called the Marchman Act because it's named after somebody whose last name was Marchman. And it is a statute that is unique to Florida. There is really nothing else out there quite like it. And it is designed for situations where there's a primary substance use disorder, meaning there's drug use, and it's primary, and we can prove it. In those instances, we can typically put somebody into treatment for 3 months at a time under a court order. The other thing that we can do,
without them agreeing to it.
I'm not waiting for them to agree to it. They're never going to agree to it. So
yes,
I mean, they sometimes. So here's the bit. It's normally the process begins with a period of assessment, and I can initiate that on an emergency basis. And what that means is there's not going to be a hearing. I'm going to submit my documents, my pleadings to the court. The court's going to review them. And if the court says, yep, we have an emergency situation, the court's going to send the police out to go and get them and take them to a receiving facility. If they're already in treatment and they are a flight risk, the court's going to order them to stay. So, and then within 10 days, there's going to be a full-blown hearing because we have to give somebody due process, which means they have the right to be heard, they have a right to a lawyer, they have a right to make me prove my case. Now, sometimes if they've spent 10 days detoxing, they will just agree to remain in treatment under a court order. Sometimes they'll make me fight. And if that's the case, then we will fight. And we'll have a hearing. And we'll prove our case. And either way, they're going to go to treatment. We're going to make sure that they do go to treatment and that they stay there long enough. And as I think I mentioned earlier, if they're not going to comply with the court order, then I have to go back to court and seek some relief. I got to make sure they stay, right? Because if they don't, then bad things happen. Like this one guy I told you about, he overdosed and eventually died. So the Marchman Act is very special here in Florida, and it's one of the reasons to come here. I think you also mentioned, India, we have guardianship. So the guardianship statute, again, I mean, there are other states that have guardianship. I think every state has a guardianship statute, but the guardianship statute was really traditionally used for elderly people. But I have a brilliant wife, and she came up with the wonderful idea that we could use guardianship for our cases. Younger people, not old people, younger people who have behavioral health issues, because guardianship gives you significantly more control than a Marchman Act. A Marchman Act can be done very quickly. Depending on the county, I can normally file a case and get a court order that same day, get somebody picked up. So it's very fast. Guardianship, even though it has an emergency piece to it too, not typically, that's not fair, does require a hearing, which will take place within 2 to 5 days, and I can, again, get a temporary 90-day order. But it gives more control, right? It might say Mark's going to treatment and his family will have access to his medical records, and they can control his finances, and they can restrict his ability to travel, where he lives, who he spends time with, take away his driver's license, even take away his right to vote. I mean, so it gives a much broader array of control. So sometimes we'll do them together because Marchman Act is fast, but guardianship gives more control. So it's not unusual for us to do a Marchman Act and a guardianship together. And then the third statute that we operate under in India is called the Baker Act. And again, like the Marchman Act, it's named after somebody whose last name was Baker. And that is a statute, again, every state has a version of the Baker Act. And it's a statute that allows the state of Florida to take custody of somebody and basically suck somebody into our mental health system. Provided it's done correctly, it can be a powerful life-saving tool. Because we want to be in a situation where somebody is actively trying to harm themselves, we can pick up the phone and call 911. The problem is that it's not only easily abused, it's frequently abused. And I file about 250 cases every year to get somebody out of the Baker Act who shouldn't be there, because once you get sucked into Florida's mental health system, nobody actually knows you're there. And unless, your family calls somebody like me, nobody even knows you're there. So if nobody knows you're there, well, who's to complain?
And to say that you still should be there.
Or
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
right? So, I typically have 2 or 3 of those cases pending at any one time in the office. It's rare that we don't have a pending case, under the Baker Act. But sometimes we use it, we use it offensively, meaning if we really need somebody, in a place of safety quickly, either we're sending out one of our clinicians to initiate the Baker Act because a clinician can initiate it, or perhaps the family's just calling 911. Or if they're in a treatment facility, the treatment facility can initiate it if that person needs a higher level of care, and they call the police. So, you've got 3 statutes that all interact because they all are forms of involuntary commitment. And then you have our criminal justice system. So I was a prosecutor for many years, and I did defense work for many years. And you see our criminal system also overlaps, right? And the reason it overlaps, India, is because sometimes people make silly decisions and get themselves arrested, and now they're sitting in the county jail. And we don't want people getting sucked into the criminal justice system, because typically good things do not happen to people when they're sitting in the county jail or a state prison.
So I don't believe that the criminal justice system as it is now is like really there to rehabilitate people, which they say that's what it's for, but I don't think it is. When you have a case of someone who was an addict or having a mental health crisis that now ends up in jail, which is very common, because substance abuse leads to increased crime rates, and then mental health, same as well. What our dogs?
Well, your dog is now talking to my dog.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, let's talk to each other.
I think we should have had the dogs interview each other.
They probably would have had a great interview, and it's funny because he's at the door right now, like thinking it's coming from out there. He doesn't when it happens on the TV too, and I'm like, it's on the TV. It's on the TV. It's not in real life. Like, there's not a dog coming to attack you. Okay, set a channel.
Can I take a second here to
Yeah.
They might stop in a second. It's probably somebody passing by the house, and they get all excited, or it's Amazon delivering something. Thank you. I'm very excited too. So my apologies to your dog, India.
No, it's fine. Yeah. My editor will just cut that out. Good boy. Good boy. Okay. Okay, so I was asking the criminal justice system, what do you see happen when someone who is going through a mental health crisis or is abusing drugs goes into the criminal justice system or goes to jail? Like, I think someone might think like, oh, well, they detox there. They can come out and they can be sober because they can't do drugs while they're there. But is that really the reality?
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point, India. So the mandate here in Florida, even today, as it was back in the 90s when I was a prosecutor, is to punish first and rehabilitate second, right? So we punish first in Florida. Now, back in the 90s, we didn't have what I call diversionary courts, meaning if you came back often enough back in the 90s, eventually we just locked you up for as long as we possibly could, right?
Mm-hmm.
These days we have these diversionary courts. So we have drug court, we have mental health court, we have veterans court. The idea is, and again, this is not for violent felony offenders. If you commit, an aggravated battery or a homicide, you're not going to go into diversionary court. They're going to look to lock you up for as long as they can. But if it's a minor offense and there's an issue, an issue with mental health or substance use, or you're a veteran, the idea is to get you the help that you need. You go through the program, and then hopefully the case gets dropped so you can get on with your life, right? But meanwhile, you got the treatment that you needed. So we have some of these diversionary courts. And it's especially effective for people who don't have the resources for treatment, right? Maybe they don't have health insurance. Maybe they don't have the money to pay for treatment, so they can get it, right? The state's going to pay for it. As far as drugs are concerned, in jail, there's plenty of drugs in jail. Okay, I've seen people that went in that did not have an issue and came out and had an issue. So I think this idea, I think people can detox in jail. And I think, and it depends on the jail. I mean, I used to go visit a client consistently for many years who was in federal custody. And I can promise you there were plenty of drugs in federal prison. It was getting chucked over the wall. You know, the corrections officers were bringing it in. You know, I mean, you name it, they had it. So the idea that there's no drugs in prison is simply a farce. But I think if somebody wants to detox, they certainly can. But I think the options when you're in prison or in the county jail are limited. I mean, here in Palm Beach County, the jail used to have a program called the Drug Farm, and it was way out west in the middle of nowhere. And again, it depended on the offense, but it was almost like a military style boot camp combined with drug treatment. And it was very successful. A lot of individuals went through it and got great results. They used to beg us to go to the drug farm. It sure as hell beats serving a sentence in the county jail. But the sheriff didn't have the money to keep it going, and they shut it down, which was a damn shame. But you know, something like that, I thought was an excellent resource, especially for people again who did not have access to treatment. You know, so I don't think that I certainly don't think that the criminal justice system, be it state or federal, is a good place for somebody who's dealing with a behavioral health issue. It just isn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do not treat prisoners well. Now, some of them may not deserve to be treated well, but that's not the point, right? Yeah. A lot of these people are there because they had a behavioral health issue, and it never got addressed because not everybody has access to quality treatment. And it gets worse over time, and then they commit worse and worse crimes, and they end up going to prison.
Exactly. And I think the work that you do shows that you're not against someone being like restrained or taken away from like larger society or having to go through a detox or losing some forms of their freedom. And I'm not either. It's more so like I would like it to actually be effective. I would like it to actually be like, okay, I send you here or you lose these freedoms, but when you come out and you get your freedom back, you are going to be sober, your mental health is going to be better, whatever the case may be. I would rather that, and then know that, okay, the likelihood of you committing more worse crimes has extremely decreased versus like, okay, you go to jail for 6 months, a year, however long your sentence is for whatever you did, and you come out and you do the same thing over and over again, or it escalates. I would rather you actually get help, whatever that help looks like for you. And then this is like where I think the conversation on what a guardianship, what conservatorship, what does like taking control away from someone look like, because the cases that we see highlighted so much are like from celebrities that we all love, or like, oh my gosh, how could they be under a conservatorship? Like Britney Spears is one of the biggest ones that we've seen like in my generation, where like we heard, okay, they were taking her money, she didn't have access to her money. When those type of stories hit headlines, what do you think people are misunderstanding about like what a guardianship, what a conservatorship is?
Okay, so I mean, here in Florida, let me back up a second. Some states have what they call conservatorship, and specifically let's talk about California, where Britney Spears was. Some states have a conservatorship, and they also have guardianship. Guardianship refers to taking control of the person, and conservatorship involves taking control of their property. right? So in her case, all the money she'd made from record sales. Okay. Here in Florida, we do not distinguish, right? We don't have separate filings. We have one filing. It's called guardianship. And in that filing, I can request control of the person and their property. So, for instance, I might want to give might want to make like one of the parents or both parents the guardian. I think in her case, her father was her guardian, right? So let's say we decide we're going to make both parents the guardian, and now that the guardian can start making decisions regarding the person's, where they live, mandating they go to treatment, make sure they take their medications, having access to their medical records. So that's the person, right? Now it turns out that this person also has property, right? Maybe they have a large sum of money in the bank and they're using it to live this crazy lifestyle. Or maybe they have a business and we want to protect it, because if they're in treatment for the next 3 months, the business is going to go down, the toilet, and we want to make sure we protect it because it's a good business and it provides them with a certain lifestyle. So perhaps the parents want to be able to start making decisions regarding that business so it can be protected while this person's in treatment. So again, it all falls under the guardianship filing, but we're going to sort of tailor it to our needs. I mean, obviously, if the person doesn't have a business or any finances that are at risk, then I don't need control over their bank account. There's no money in it, right? But my bigger focus, India, is going to be on making sure I have control of the person, because that's the bit where I can make sure they go to treatment, right? Have access to their medical records, make sure they take their medications, control who they spend time with, right? We don't want them spending time with people after they get out of treatment that encourage relapse as opposed to supporting recovery, right? The old loser friends are gone. No more.
Exactly. So you're like, okay, I'd rather control the person. And if I feel like there's a business or there's some type of like economic impact that would be negative towards them if we don't take control over it, you would request that too. But more so, it's about the individual and their safety themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Look, you probably know as much about the Britney Spears case as I do, because you probably read more about it than I do. But I think what was going on there is that it sounds like there was an allegation that she, because of her mental state, that she was probably running, just completely running through the money, right? However much it was, probably a few $100 million, right? And making just absolutely insane decisions. One day she's shopping in Costco. The next thing you know, she's buying a $2 million boat for a boyfriend. I mean, silly stuff, right? So obviously, what the father wanted to do was to make sure he protected that money. So he was able to get control of it through the conservatorship process in California. Now, I mean, I think that was going on for 11 years. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it was a long period of time.
That's a long period of time. Now, I will tell you, our guardianship cases typically don't go that long. I mean, we're usually in a case for a year, maybe a little bit longer, right? Remember I told you the recovery process is typically a year-long journey. I mean, we're not looking to make this a permanent situation. Our goal, even if we're filing for guardianship, is at some point to be able to go back into court and restore this person's rights. I mean, the goal here is to get them back in the game so they can become productive members of society and live, a fulfilling and, fruitful life. We're not looking for the parents to have control over them for the next 10 years. That doesn't really, how does that help anybody? So our cases don't normally run 11 years. A year, maybe a little bit longer.
And that
That's
seems
it.
fair to me because it's like, to your point, that's how long it would take to get like a treatment to where you feel like it's stuck. They have their routine, their normal new normal course of life. And I think a lot of what you said is relying upon the fact of like you're not a predatory lawyer or law firm. What recourse does someone who may, like, maybe their family got hooked up with a predatory lawyer, maybe they had a lot of money, like Britney Spears, doesn't really matter, generational wealth, whatever the case may be, and they got into a guardianship under real reasons, but they've recovered. It's been longer than a year. Like, what can they do to get out of it? Like, are there legal ways they can challenge it, at least in
Ye-
Florida?
Yeah. So, when it comes to dealing with elderly people, that's when we tend to see abuse, right? We do not take those cases, right? Because somebody who's elderly that may need to be placed in a hospital type setting, a care type setting, is not likely to recover, right? They're not like our clients or our wards. They go into treatment, they recover, and then we go back in and restore rights. These are people who are going to need help most certainly for the rest of their life. Now, so that means, the court requires an annual report, meaning once a year we have to tell the court what's going on, just so the court keeps an eye on things. So those people are probably never going to recover. There's never going to be a point in time where somebody's going to go back into court and restore their capacity. Where the abuse comes in is when you're dealing with what happens is maybe the family doesn't want to act as the guardian, so the court appoints a professional guardian, right? That guardian has to be represented by a lawyer. So you've got 3 sets of lawyers, one for the guardian, one for the petitioner, and one for the ward, the patient. And what happens is that the money gets used up by all the lawyers and the guardian, and there's nothing left to take care of the patient. Now, are there situations where the professional guardian, steals money? Yeah, it's interesting. We had a situation here in Palm Beach County. I won't name the judge, but he got his wife to train and become a professional guardian, and then every time there was a guardianship case, he'd get his wife appointed to the case. And he would represent his friend, the lawyer, to represent the wife. Because remember, I told you the guardian has to have their own lawyer. And of course, the local newspaper got wind of this because the judge's wife was making money. The friend who was the lawyer who was representing the wife, he was making money. And it just stunk to high heaven. And what ended up happening is the judge had to resign. Because, it was, he was feeding business to his own wife.
It's like abuse of power because and like
completely,
interest because now
completely.
you have an interest to say yes to a guardianship that may
Right.
maybe
These people
lead
went to
to
the
just
court to get help, and instead they got milked. And I went in front of this judge, and he was not a particularly nice individual. So, to be perfectly honest with you, he got what was coming to him. If you live in a glass house, don't throw stones. And again, I'm not going to name names. It doesn't matter anymore at this point. But, as lawyers, as officers of the court, right, we owe a duty to make sure that we're here. Our duty is to act as a shield, not as a sword. And what I mean by that, India, is we're here to try and help people. Even though the ward, right, the patient is not my client, I'm trying to do something that's in their best interests, even if they don't think so at the time. Right? I charge for my services, but I'm not looking to milk anybody's estate. That's not how we make money. It's not how we get paid. And there have been times, India, not many, but a couple of times where we've had clients who lied to us and didn't tell us the truth about what they were doing. And you know what I did with those clients? I fired them. I withdrew from their case and told them, don't call me again. Because what we do is a shield. It's not a sword. I'm here to help people. And if I find out that you're using the system to try and hurt somebody, you got the wrong lawyer. I won't take your case. If I find out afterwards you were lying to me and were trying to do something nefarious, I'm going to terminate service. I'm going to withdraw from your case, and you're done.
A lot of what you said is relying upon the fact that you are an ethical lawyer, as all lawyers take an ethics, whatever. What do you?
I think 99.9% of lawyers try to do the right thing.
Yeah, and it's like you guys have a duty to do that, but not all of them. There's always going to be the bad apple. The bad.
There is, and I think, look, I've been in front of judges all over the state, and I would tell you that 99.9% of the judges I ever went in front of, even in different counties, were absolutely terrific. I was always treated with enormous respect. I think they tried very hard to get it right. even if they didn't rule for me, because you litigate enough cases, you don't, right? I mean, I've tried 200 jury trials when I was prosecutor in 5 years, which is an insane amount of trials in that period of time. I didn't win them all, right? I won a lot of them, but the point is, if you litigate enough cases, you're going to lose some, right? I'm not looking for the judge to be my friend. I'm looking for the judge to be fair. And sometimes a judge makes a ruling you don't agree with. That's our system. That's how it works. And for the most part, I was always treated with great respect, and given a fair hearing. So, I mean, most of the people who work in our system, the judges, the clerks, the lawyers, even if they're opposing counsel, try to do the right thing. Even if they're fighting like hell, they try to do the right thing, in my experience.
And like, I guess also from your perspective, since you said if you've found out like, hey, someone who's tried to hire you is doing something nefarious, they're not actually all in it to help their family member, loved one, how would you find something like that out? And what do you do to make sure that, like, in your court requests, you're not requesting too much control? And how do you know when, and this is a separate but similar question, how do you know when it's time to say, okay, like, we're going to petition to relieve this guardianship?
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes India, when somebody calls and we start, looking under the microscope at the case, it's clear there's something not right, and we'll just reject the case and say, sorry, we can't help you. Sometimes we don't see everything until we're in the case and now we're litigating it and things pop up and we're like, that doesn't make sense. They're telling me X and Y, but I'm seeing, A, B, and C. And when we find out, obviously, that something's not right, we're not going to continue with the case. I mean, as an officer of the court, I have an ethical responsibility to the court, not to the client, but to the court, not to suborn perjury, not to file a case, right, that doesn't have merits. In other words, that the allegations that I'm alleging, we have to believe in good faith that they are true. And if I have reason to believe they are not true, then we're going to withdraw from the case. We're just going to file a motion and say, Judge, we can no longer continue, right? I'm not at liberty to tell the court why, because everything I learn is protected. It's privileged, attorney-client privilege. I'm going to tell the judge, sorry, I have irreconcilable differences with my client. I can no longer continue to represent them. And the judge is going to let me out of the case 9 times out of 10. So I'm not going to continue in a case if it's clear that the client is just not being honest with us. I'm just not. And sometimes we've had that before, and the client gets all bent out of shape. Too bad. I'm here to help people, not hurt them.
And when you do have the cases where someone was helped, they had their guardianship for a year, they're in remission, how do you decide, like, what are the key factors you look at in deciding with the client, like, okay, we can release the conservator or guardianship? Right?
Yeah, so a lot of the time the family will come back and say, look, they're doing really well. So in order to take away rights, the court, at the very beginning of the process, India appoints what's known as an examining committee. That is 3 court-appointed experts who are going to make a determination if the person needs a guardianship. And if 2 say yes, then it's a matter of, okay, what rights are we taking away? And it's the same process when we go to basically, what we call restore capacity. We're going to ask the court to tell the examining committee members to re-examine the patient. And if the examining committee members say, yep, they're good to go, then the court is going to give them back, restore capacity, give them back their rights to start making decisions for themselves. And at that point, the case is effectively over.
And then do you, I guess, ever, like, do you have a team who's like, oh, it's been a year since Joe Blow has been on the guardianship, we should check in with his family? Or is it just like you guys wait for them to reach out to you?
Well, a lot of the time we're in constant contact with our families.
Okay.
So
you guys like have updated notes and know what's
Yeah, I mean, we're typically in constant contact, and obviously our family's always free to reach out to us, India. They know they can always call us, they can email us. So sometimes it might be the family initiating the contact with us if we haven't heard from them in a while.
Okay. And then to kind of pivot, You said you used to work in prosecution
Hmm.
and in the like criminal justice system. How did you get into doing this line of work that you do now?
Um, okay, how much more time do we have? Um,
11
here's
minutes.
okay, may not be enough. All right, here's the deal. So when I was prosecutor, I didn't make very much money. In fact, the first 2 years I was living at home with my parents. Um, After I left the state attorney's office, I really lost my passion for practicing law. And primarily because even though I didn't make a lot of money, I always felt good about what I did. So when I was in a felony trial unit, which means you're prosecuting first and second degree felonies, and I was always in trial. I mean, I was always in trial. So which trial work is very tiring. So I'd be in trial all day, which meant I'd have to work most of the night to get ready for the next morning, which meant also have to work on the weekends to prepare either for a closing argument or for the next case. So after 5 years, I was really burned out. But when I was in a felony trial unit and I was prosecuting, violent felony offenders, or I had the family of a decedent if it was a murder case, I took that responsibility extremely seriously, like I do now. And um, you can't unring the bell, right? Somebody's been killed, somebody's been seriously injured. I can't change that, but I can give them some justice. I can give them some closure by prosecuting successfully the perpetrator and throwing his or her ass in prison for committing a violent felony offense, right, against this person. And obviously, it was a murder case and someone's deceased. That family needs closure. And anyway, the long and short of it is the work was very intense but very satisfying. I left in 1999. I did defense work. I made a boatload more money, but I was completely miserable. And I tried for many years not to practice law. Long story short is in 2014, actually 2015, I met somebody that changed the direction of my life. I got invited to a breakfast meeting. There was a gentleman there. His name is R. John Robbins, and he runs a company down in Miami called How to Manage a Small Law Firm. And what they do is they teach lawyers the one thing that no law student at any law school anywhere in the country ever learns while they're in law school. And that is the business of practicing law. Not practicing law, but the business of running a law firm. And I saw him speak one morning and begged him for a job. And I spent a year learning all about the business of practicing law. And after a year there, I decided it was time to finally, at 49, I'm 59 now, so it was almost 10 years ago. Well, actually, it was 10 years ago. February of 16, I opened up my own law firm. Excuse me, India. With no money. I was broke. I sat down in the local library and I just started calling people. I mean, the library had free Wi-Fi and pretty cheap coffee. That nice little coffee store there. And I just sat down and I just started calling people. And by way of background, I hadn't actually lived in Florida for 3 years. I spent 3 years having a good time in California. But one thing I learned from R. John Robbins was the importance of niching. In other words, finding a specialty and doing it to the best of my ability. Now, I had a lot of close family members and friends who had these issues, and there was nobody out there helping them. There was other lawyers who were dabbling in it. They might do a Marchman Act here and there, but no one anywhere in the country that I could find had built a law firm like this, doing just this work. And I decided I was going to build that law firm, and I was going to do it better than anybody else. And for the first 14 months, I took other kinds of cases because nobody knew who I was. I ran around to treatment centers with my very cheap Vistaprint business cards, and I introduced people to myself. That's what I did. And I would have lunch and coffees and whatever else with people who would listen to my idea. And so for the first 14 months, I took all kinds of cases because I had bills to pay. I took criminal cases. I took family law cases. I represented a student athlete here in Central Florida who got himself in a bit of hot water with a female student. And it took 14 months for me to get that first case. And 11 months in, I lost my dad as well, unexpectedly. So it was a crazy time. And 2 days after I buried him, I had a family member that was sucked into the mental health system here in Florida. So talk about chaos. It was chaos, but I kept moving forward. And in 2017, I got a small office. I met my now wife in that office, and we decided we wanted to work together. And for the next 6 years, it was just the two of us doing everything: sales, marketing, meeting with clients, drafting pleadings, running to court. I was driving 25,000 miles a year. I now drive about 12. Because the last 3 years, we've been able to hire staff. But for the first 7, it was just the two of us doing everything. I mean, I still work 6 days a week, typically 7, right? I very rarely handle cases anymore. I focus on another part of the business that I enjoy doing, which is the sales and marketing. But every once in a while, I have to handle a case. I was in Miami 2 weeks ago. I had another client that came to us that I was asked personally to handle the case, so I did. And I'm in court tomorrow morning. I'll be getting up early to get up to this facility. I've got a 14-year-old boy who's stuck in a state facility. I'm going to try to get him out. So I still handle some cases, but the bulk of what I do is, well, talking to people like you, India, who care enough to listen to my message.
Yes. I mean, it's so beautiful. Everything about like from what you do and how you got into it, like, is a story and a journey in itself.
Well, it's a trip.
And it's like most people, I know I was telling you before, it's like you think, oh, my life's over when I'm 30 or my life's over when I'm 40. And you decided, like, I'm going to start this business. You didn't have money. You started it in a library at 49. And I think, like, right now there's this whole idea because of social media, like the idea of overnight success. But
It took me 10 years to be an overnight success.
I was gonna say, like,
And I don't think we've even come close to scratching the surface of what our full potential is. So it's never too late. But being 59 now, India, and not the spring chicken of 49 that I once was, I feel a certain sense of urgency. Right, I'm on the second half of my life, right? Probably in the bottom. I'm almost 60. I'll probably live, knock on wood, maybe I live till I'm 90 or 95. So I'm 2/3 of the way there, even if I live that long. I have less time left than I've just spent, and I'm not nearly where I need to be. So I have a certain hustle about me.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like your hustle got bigger and stronger as you got older?
Yeah, I think I got more focused, especially after I lost my dad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's taken 10 years of grinding to get where we are now. I'm not going out and buying a private jet or Ferrari tomorrow. I'm comfortable. I'm going to take my wife for a nice dinner tonight, but I'm careful with how I spend my money. I pay my taxes every month. I save every month. I'm not blowing my money on silly things like I used to when I was much younger, and I thought I had all the time in the world. Apparently I didn't.
So now it's just like a shift in value of time, like you value time more, but
Well,
life
I do,
isn't
but
over, and you know you can still do so much. You just value your time.
well, I do, but my wife and I have certain goals that we want to accomplish, and I need to hustle to get. I want those goals now. I want them to happen in the next couple of years. I'm not waiting another 10 years for those goals to materialize. So I got to step up my game. I got to hustle, right? I have to take massive action. I mean, that's what it's about, right? That's how you build a business. You take massive action, and you simply don't take no for an answer. Yeah, and you get out there and you try to meet as many people as we can. These days, look, we have this wonderful tool. It's this.
Hmm.
You can reach out and literally touch anybody on the planet with this one little thing in your hand, right? When I first started, 10 years ago when we had the internet, but we didn't have the reach that we have now. I mean, I have 825 videos on YouTube. I make them every day with my phone. I didn't have that ability back 10 years ago. I mean, maybe I put out a few videos, but not the kind of volume I do now. And people weren't so much looking for me, online. They were still using the Yellow Pages. Yellow Pages? What the hell is that?
Yeah, it's like that book, right? And it had like
Yeah, that
different
nobody uses anymore.
authors. Yeah, I didn't. I like vaguely remember it from.
Yeah, why would I use Yellow Pages? I could just run my own campaign on Google. Why would I spend money with Yellow Pages? I could pay for PPC.
Yeah.
I don't need Yellow Pages. I could do it myself. Or, I mean, in this case, I have somebody that does it for me. But there was a point in time earlier on, India, where I didn't have the money to pay somebody else to do it for me, so it didn't get done. I didn't have the money for marketing. I wrote my first check for marketing for $1,250, and I prayed that it wouldn't bounce. I probably spend that
Yeah.
a day now in marketing.
Wow. It's just crazy to show like how like action leads to results. Even if you don't get the first action right, even if you don't get the second action right, eventually if you're making better decisions each time or using what you learned from the previous action,
Right.
your
Not
actions will
everything and not
eventually
every
align.
marketing thing I do works. Okay, now I know that doesn't work. I'll do
Hmm.
something else.
Exactly. I think like hearing that is like you can't be afraid to do something wrong as long as you know like your overall goal is something meaningful and purposeful to you. You just have to take action. And I think it very much aligns with the line of work that you're in now. It's like we have to take action to save
Well,
this person's life.
I hear what you're
Not to say
saying, but at the end of the day, it's just a business,
that.
right? It's no, and this is the bit that lawyers don't understand. There's no difference between my law firm business and a car dealership and a restaurant and a hotel and a barbershop. We're all selling something, a product or a service. And when you boil it down to that, because that's all it really is, then the same things apply in terms of the sales, the marketing, how the work gets done. Now, obviously, I'm governed by a certain set of ethical rules because I'm licensed by an administrative agency here in Florida called the Florida Bar. So if I do things wrong, such as stealing client money, they're going to take away my license and I won't be able to charge for selling legal services. So, I have to bear that in mind, which is why I don't deal with clients who lie to me.
Exactly, because that would honestly hurt your legal
Because,
reputation
well, it's not
versus.
just that. It's that, if I perpetuate a fraud on the court by knowingly presenting false evidence, I could get disciplined. The Florida
Yeah.
bar could take my license away, and then I can't put food on the table. So,
And my last question, because I know you have to get back to all of your very important work, is what would you say to someone who feels like it's too late to start over, reinvent themselves, start something new, whatever the case may be?
well, I don't think it's ever too late. But here's the deal: the time's going to pass whether you take action or not. So why not take the action?
Why not take the action?
I mean,
Yeah.
listen. You know what? You want to sit at home and do nothing with your life? That's fine. I'm not here to judge. I'm just telling you that the time is going to go by either way. So why
Hmm.
not use it wisely? Because once it's gone forever. It's never coming back. You can never get it back.
I feel like that's how I need to end the episode because it's like
All right.
you will never get it back. As I said, like, subscribe, follow I Love You But podcast wherever you hear your podcast. And I will have Mark's information linked here in the description of
Thanks,
the
India.
episode so that you can get to his website, get to any other resources he wants to share with me. I'll have linked so that you can connect with him in his business.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
Bye, India.
Bye.
Nice to
Good
see you
night.
again.